Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. Midge and I are going to sit here and talk about writing your own obituary. And generally, what we want to do is encourage you to write your own, because we believe that if you do it, no one else will have to do it. And besides, who knows you better than you? And I think it's one of the kindest things you can do to for your family is to write your own, because when you die, it's a real burden and a task to have to sit down and write about the person's death, your life. And so let's get to it. Midge and I are going to share our own history with obituaries, writing our own, or our history of writing it. And then we'll give you examples of what we've found to be enlightening. And Midge has compiled a list that may aid you in your own task of writing. I've also taken some ideas from an article on this very subject that came out in the Spokesman Review just before Midge and I did the same workshop. We did a workshop on writing your own obituary here in Twist a month before COVID hit. And I'll read some from that. And I will also give you some ideas about the cost of putting your obituary in various newspapers. But most of all, the fact that you're here today means that you know this is a good idea, and that it might actually get done. And remember, what you write down today, you can change tomorrow. It's definitely a process. Buy yourself a notebook and a lot of erasers. Let the piece marinate, with time. For instance, I think I blurt and then I edit, or should I say, I blurt, therefore I edit. And it's the perfect time to reflect on your life. You get to say how you want people in the future to remember you. Details are better than generalizations, and don't put in everything. So I wrote an article, amazingly enough, 37 years ago for the Methow Valley News called Write Your Own Obituary, or Someone Else Will, in January of 1985, when I was 39 years old. And I'm going to say what I wrote about it. If you don't write it, someone else will, and then you could end up sounding like you were like everybody else, and you weren't. You weren't. And not knowing when it might be needed should not be a problem, except to say that you should get this project done right away. Then as the years roll by, should they roll by, and you feel inclined, you can revisit it, reconsider it, add a paragraph or two, and delete whole sections. And I go on about my father, who had written his own obituary 8 years before, so actually 9 years before he died, so that it would be done right. And he gave a copy of this obituary to his daughters, his 3 daughters, and we put it in our closets, and we waited for his death. And then when the time came, we sent it to the indicated newspapers. It was really a very generous thing that he did for us. We were too busy being children while he was leading a very interesting life, so we could not have pulled it off. And I go on to say, I wrote mine one night this winter. Perhaps if I share a few sentences from it, you might be inspired to have a go on your own. Diana Hotel keeled over Tuesday, just as abrupt in death as she was in life. Wow. Yeah. She belonged to no clubs, had no children, leaves one disheartened husband at the home on the Twist River.
Amen.
You can see why these things need editing. She attended Catholic schools dressed in uniforms, thus her atrocious taste in clothes. She married young. She stayed married and liked it. Theirs was one of the good ones. She and he traveled extensively, and if she ever excelled in anything in particular, it was traveling, although eventually Twist became far more interesting to her than even Timbuktu. Okay, so I wrote that a long time ago, and then after Midge and I did this workshop 2 years ago, I have to sit down and do it again, right? And Bill and I did it last year, and so I got myself a notebook and I've written notes. These are important because they're there for anyone. If you happen to suddenly keel over, they can access your notes. So make sure people know where you have put them. And I'm just gonna, this is a blurt. Conceived on Mare Island, California, when her father's ship came in for repairs toward the end of World War II, Diana Watts rocked in utero across the country on a train, thus instilling in her the wanderlust that marked much of her life, etc., etc. I had fun with it, and you too can. Mitch.
Okay. My history on obituary writing started because my mom died in first day of spring 2012. She was almost 98. I was her live-in caregiver for years and nobody else rallied for it. So I just automatically wrote it. And then, I don't know, if maybe a year or two later, the Greek Orthodox Church in North Seattle that I was going to had this book group, and the book they're working on was about death. And it was a dreadfully boring book, I thought. And the priest said at the end of the book reading, okay, write something about what you got out of the book. And then the next time we meet, everybody will read their portion. Well, I just sat there and looked at the screen and think, oh yeah, right. This is so boring. I can't think of anything to write. And this is what I wrote. And when we got together, everybody read their thing. It was all very, very inspiring and philosophical and all that bit. And then the class was over and we all stood up and were starting to walk out. I thought, oh, great, he missed me. Yay. And then he stopped everybody and said, wait, we haven't heard from Midge. I thought, oh no. And I said, well, it's not appropriate. It's not what you wanted. And it's probably sacrilegious and it's probably slapstick, and then they all just perked up and they sat down and here's what I wrote. Midge, Mary, Miri, Masha, Molly, Connor died. Somehow, somewhere, sometime, because we all die somehow, somewhere, sometime. She started out on June 16, 1949 on a Thursday. Not quite a Father's Day present, but at least wedged in between two boys. In 1969, she became the proud owner of a birth certificate that finally had a name, and then followed a passport. Nearly 10 years later, she changed that name and then followed college transcripts. Do not do an autopsy or you'll have a long list of unpronounceable cross-cultural cooties. Most likely cause is that Our Lady of Perpetual Motion simply wore herself out. Post-high school, Midge Mary managed to attend 9 institutes of higher learning and was awarded with both a BA and an MA, which pieces of paper look good hanging on the wall, but sadly never aided in landing a career. Jobs? At least 39 and counting. Midge, being easily distracted, left hordes of stuff dating back to babyhood, such as a stuffed lamb, because you never know when you might need something. She also left behind friends and remnants of family who will have to find other people to plan odd and unusual activities. Midge was a literalist. We think she has gone to be with Jesus, but we have to be careful how we say that. If she passed what? The exam? Passed out? Passed gas? If she fell asleep, then yikes, she could wake up, and that would be scary. If she went home, well, then how come the lights haven't come back on? So we will just say she died. Midge is dead. If you love Jesus and you're dead, you're with Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit, and that's that. Amen. Donations kindly accepted to make a garden statue of St. Midge of Kirkland with the bird feeder hanging from one hand and the other hand dangling in a bird bath. And the priest looked at me and he said, "You've written your obituary." I said, "You can't be serious." He said, "I'm serious." And he wanted a copy. So that was the 2013, 14.
Good. Amazingly enough, about 3 days before Midge and I did this workshop 2 years ago, a story came out in the Spokesman Review about writing your own obituary. And I'm going to take some excerpts from it because I thought it was a well-written article. Let's see, in the industry for 29 years, Rob Goff was a Spokane-based director of Washington State Funeral Directors, said he thinks the best obituaries are ones self-written by individuals. The obituaries that stand out to me are the ones where people really put thought into what they want to say and how. They don't go to the standards, just a next of kin listing. They go deeper and tell a story of the person's life. It might just be one little sentence in the middle of the obituary, but that sentence makes it a human interest story. Maybe it's a little joke, but it's that one thing that makes it an interesting obituary. Certain elements do bring an obituary to another level, said Jamie Passaro, a writer in Eugene. She operates the business called Dear Person, writing obituaries for clients or teaching obituary writing classes. I advise people at any age to write their own obituary, Passaro said. That's because it's not only an interesting, meaningful, and even a fun exercise, but it's a huge gift to your family or your loved ones not to have to take on this research and writing project while they're grieving for you. It's a balance, she said. She avoids resume-like list of accomplishment, but adds milestones. She tries to get a few details beyond the adjectives, and we'll talk about that. Goff reminds people an obituary is typically the only chance to put one's life into writing. If you don't have an obituary, or you don't write an obituary that tells your life story, there is not much of a trail that you've existed. Not much more than a birth and death certificate, Goff said. An obituary is a written statement that you walked on this earth where people can look back years from now and say, this person lived. Their life is still remembered and celebrated. And go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're gonna put on the screen
Okay.
something that might interest you. It's just something to trigger your memory. And what I found after writing my mom's, because I had to get all this information down. So I started drawing some basic things to think about. And so if you just list stuff in a notebook, I mean, literally list it. This is not something to write sentences out. It helps in many ways after a person's gone. Not just an obituary, but maybe a memorial program in a church service or a wake somebody can read, or telling stories, or maybe tracking down things that they have to do legally, whatever. It really helps. And then from the list, then you yourself can draw together things and balance it out and make an interesting obituary or a boring obituary as you wish. And or somebody else can do it and make it all up for all you care. You're gone.
Excuse me, Midge. We can't really see that very well. Can you enlarge it? Like there is a little plus magnifying glass at the top. Yeah, there. Okay.
Unfortunately, I can't,
Oh.
move it
There.
around. But what I'm going to say,
There.
if people want this piece of paper, you can email me and I will email it to you.
Or
So if you-
email it to me and I can send it to the whole group.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so in that case, then what I'll do is I'll just go down really quickly so you can get an idea of what
Okay.
things I thought. Okay, so I have it divided up into 4 sections, well, 5 actually. And basic foundational would be your name, all the names you've ever had, all your nicknames. And I have a lot of those. And date of birth, location of birth, the country, if it's not the USA, names of birth parents, adoptive parents, who helped rear you, like your nanny,
My name.
names of mates or partners, names of children, and for me, your pets, your most current pet, which I don't have, names of grandchildren, great grandchildren, or nieces and nephews, names of siblings, if you have any, and state who, if any, precede you in death. And then I added, it's not on this list, I added genetic ethnicity via, if you've done ancestry, your ancestry DNA. I looked it up, it's called genetic ethnicity.
Okay.
And then life history. And I would sort of stick those 2 together in a way, because it's almost like you're listing a lot of things. So your high school, the location, year of graduation, your institutes of higher learning, including trade schools, etc., dates of graduation, kind of degree, specialty, any certificates, that kind of stuff. Boring. Jobs, careers, that's really different. And that includes being a homemaker. That's important. That's a real job, I believe. Volunteer, military service, religious service, you name it. And that's a real list. And then I added where you have lived. I think that's kind of interesting, like what states or what countries you might have lived in. And that also might help people find information that they need for something down the road. And then the next section is my least favorite. It's called brag and boast. You list all the memberships in various organizations, clubs, fraternities, religious institutions, and then your honors, awards, accomplishments, languages you can speak enough to get around, books you've written, music you've composed, gallery showings, that sort of thing. And then my favorite is the section number 4 and 5, human interest, sentimental, fun, weird, wacky, you name it. So hobbies, interests, collections, sports and recreation, travels and adventures, disasters and diseases survived. Unfortunately, that's probably where I have most of my information. Silly memories, fun facts, something out of the ordinary. Like, have you had an audience with the Pope or the Dalai Lama, etc. And then the last section, which I really love, is philosophical, spiritual, meaningful. I'm always attracted to that when I read obituaries. Kind of like how you wish to be remembered, maybe a one-liner on your legacy, that which you're most passionate about, what drives you, what inspires you. Maybe some personality or character traits that help define you. And then at the end, it would be helpful if you put down, because of your passions and causes that you support, where would you like a donation or support to be sent to what organization? So there's other things, but I just thought that was a good starter. You can add your own, you can just not even bother with it, but I found it really helpful. And after I did this the other day, when I redid it from 2 years ago, I typed up my own, which took me less than an hour, just to give you an idea. You can't see them. Maybe you see them up there, the page up there.
I'm gonna stop sharing it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So,
Two pages.
yeah. Okay.
And that filled out all of the categories without going into a lot of extras. And one thing I added was to attach a photo like your high school graduation photo. And then the one that's closest to when you died, but when you still had a face and, you hadn't been sort of decomposing in the process for the last 10 years since you've been in the dry land of this Eastern Washington or Central Washington. So you scrape the flakes off your face. Okay, I think that's, next section.
I think that's a really good idea, that if you write down these things and put them where someone is going to find them when you die, if you haven't really written the final piece of your obituary, they will find this information written down by you and the things that were most important to you, etc. And it will ease their writing of your obituary. I have 3 examples of obituaries that I enjoyed. One was from a newspaper. I didn't know this person, Sonia Todd, in October of 2012. And this is how she wrote her own, and this is it. She said, "My name is Sonia Todd, and I died of cancer at the age of 38. I decided to write my own obituary because they are usually written in a couple of different ways that I just don't care for." And she goes on, and then she said, "I don't like the timeline format because, let's face it, I never really accomplished anything of note, other than giving birth to my two wonderful, lovable, witty, and amazing sons, James and Jason, and marrying my gracious, understanding, and precious husband, Brian," etc., etc. The truth, or my version of it, is this: I tried to do the best I could. Sometimes I succeeded, most of the time I failed, but I tried. And she goes on. Some folks told me that writing my own obituary was morbid, but I think it's great because I get a chance to say thank you to all the people who helped me along the way. And she says, "If you think of me and would like to do something in honor of my memory, do this: volunteer at a school, write a letter to someone and tell them how they have had a positive impact on your life. If you smoke, quit," and she goes on like that. It's quite a long obituary. And then the services will be held, and she says where, and in lieu of flowers, a memorial fund has been set up at a bank to aid the Todd Boys Educational Fund. So that, I thought, was very personal, and it's certainly memorable. And I'm reading it to you 10 years later, so we remember Sonia Todd. This was written by my friend Jim Goodsell, who lived here for years, and he wrote it 2 years before he died. It was a tongue-in-cheek obituary, which actually, on his demise, did run in the front page of the Methow Valley News. And inside there was a more sober obituary, or a more conventional obituary, which wasn't half as fun as the one on the front page. Jim Goodsell finally kicked the bucket Tuesday while seated at his table at the Methow Valley News. Several hours elapsed before his co-workers discovered that the old boy wasn't just dozing, he was actually dead. Okanagan County Coroner Dr. Gina Fino said death was caused by a dangling participle. Jim Goodsell hated grammatical mistakes. He attended Columbia College and majored in alcohol, women, and nicotine. These are all excerpts. I mean, it was longer than this. Since August of 2002, Jim has spent every Tuesday proofreading this newspaper. Some of his work habits were highly unconventional. Most proofreaders do not look up from their work and announce to all within earshot, "This is a piece of crap." Now that he has finally kicked the bucket, we think we'll miss him, sort of. So that was Jim Goodsell, and that really, to me, it brings Jim back.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barry Stromberger is nodding yes, lived across the street from Jim. Yes, indeed. Then my final example is from the Methow Valley News, written in 2019 for Eric Huffy Huff. Eric Huffy Huff, 48, of Twist, lost his brief but brave battle with pancreatic cancer on May 28th. And there's to know him was to love him. For all the things that made him different from the rest of us, he was, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of an enigma. He was kind, he was bitter, he was frugal, he was generous, he was gregarious, he was a loner. He was warm, he was distant. He was easygoing, he was impatient. He loved Spam, his friends, energy drinks, tequila shots, canned peas, drinking too much, staying out too late, fishing, pull tabs, tater tots, being gross, growing avocado plants from seeds, eating sushi with his cousin, watching golf on TV, telling dirty jokes, being organized, remembering birthdays, learning new things, cooking, and old TV shows. He hated tourists, liars, and cheats, relying on anyone but himself, being forced into anything, being the center of attention, gossip, and most of all, having to leave his loved ones and his friends behind. He will be missed. There will be a potluck casserole cook-off competition in celebration of his life at his home away from home, the Branding Iron Pub in Twisp, on Saturday, June 29th from noon to 2. Don't forget the tater tots and the spam. Eric Huff.
Okay, fine art as fun. These are from the Seattle Times for the most part. When the lockdown started, I started collecting the Seattle Sunday Times just to kind of get a little bit of history with the pandemic. And so I started reading all the obituaries, and especially the ones in my age group. So I mainly looked from age 48 to like say 60, because I'm 72 3/4. And I started noticing things that I thought were good things and things that were really boring and things that were like so unnecessary, I thought. But I guess they just had a lot of money. They just wanted to just keep paying for a lot of inches in the Sunday Times. But I learned nothing about the personality, nothing about the person, some of them. But then others, I learned a whole lot, and they were really balanced. And speaking of balance, with that paper that I did that you can get copies of if you want it, I suggested, like, say, the basics and the life history. No, the basics and life basics, 20%. And then life history and brag and boast, 30%. And then human interest and philosophical meaningful, 50%. That's just how I think. I like things done, but you can choose your own what you want. But a balance is really more interesting. And you don't have to have it like in sections. And here's a good example of somebody who mixed, let's see, section 2, 3, 4, and 5 all in one paragraph. And I thought he did a brilliant job. But actually, I'm going to start with our local Kurt Snover, because his Seattle Times is 1 inch. And in that 1 inch, he really got almost every topic, every category. Kurt Snover, 78, died unexpectedly while walking near his Winthrop, Washington home. He loved physics, the outdoors, photography, family, friends, laughing, reading, and thinking. Kurt is survived by his wife of 57 years, Susan, and then all the relatives. Please support the Meadow Valley Housing Trust. So I thought that was a really good, concise obituary that kind of captures a person. Well, I didn't even know, but it really captures that person. And then in this one, this guy who's he's younger than I am. And I liked how he wrote this. Instead of just saying graduated from Bellevue High School, he said, after graduating from Bellevue High School, David studied biology and chemistry at the University of Puget Sound. He was a free thinker and a teacher, a champion of the environment and the underdog. As president of the Environmental Awareness Club, he successfully lobbied for university-wide recycling. From his campus office, amidst a sea of empty coffee mugs, he petitioned trustees to divest from South Africa, and they did. One fateful afternoon, while juggling in the Student Union building, he met Monica, who would become his lifelong partner. His dog Lola and her dog Lobo were soon inseparable, as were they in early courtship. In early courtship, they wrote letters for Amnesty International, hosted spirited student discussions on philosophical and scientific conundrums at their Salmon Beach home, and kayaked the San Juan Islands. They also may have stolen and rehomed a few cats from the local kill shelter. I thought that was fun and interesting and informative. And then here's another one that I thought was a really balanced and interesting obituary. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Let's see. Edie warmed rooms with her charming wit and unforgettable personality. She made wallflowers feel like guests of honor, talked shop with all walks of life, and built enduring friendships marked by fierce loyalty. Her great beauty and gorgeous red hair was somehow matched by inner beauty, strength, and resilience. Edie dedicated life to helping others as a registered nurse of 40 years. Her commitments extended beyond service as an active supporter, fundraiser, and board member of Seattle arts institutions and theaters. From France, Italy, and Japan to the closer to home Oregon coast, Edie's travels inspired new memories with loved ones. Elegant and individualistic, her impeccable taste was unparalleled and clear to all who met her. Edie was a champion of female and local artists, curating a special collection in addition to antique furniture and fashion. She knew the power of a great outfit and a rearranged room. Edie did her best to problem solve on the go, conjuring new business ideas with her daughters while walking around Green Lake. Foggy days were her favorite. So were the corners of select calorie-free pastries. She always took the high road, even in the most challenging moments. Edie did all of this and more while raising 4 daughters and teaching them the meaning of true unconditional love. She saw the best in people and always said, "I love you," to those she held most dear. It was a life well lived. We feel blessed and grateful for every moment we spent with her. We are better because of her. What a woman, what a legacy, one that will live on in her children and grandchildren. We raise a glass of very cold gin, neat, to you. We love you always.
That's nice.
That's a really cool one. And then this one's like, it's like really long. This is almost the whole column. This is over $2,000 of, but this guy, he's so amazing. He's my age and I think I better go wander off in the woods and die. I mean, this guy, he lived a life of meaning and purpose. And like here, a paragraph. On an international level, Bob facilitated several public health initiatives over the span of 15 years, primarily in Malawi, one of the most least developed countries in Africa. He traveled frequently to Africa and collaborated with farmers on installing shallow well pumps for safe drinking water, and later distributed treadle pumps designed to efficiently water crops rather than hand carrying water. Bob and Diane enjoyed hiking to villages and learning with farmers what innovative practices are effective and sustainable, and on and on and on. I mean, that's one life that's just amazing. And then here's some examples of what I consider unbalanced obituaries. This one, and I did it by colors. So the color is mainly what would be under the basic and life history kind of thing. And I really learned very little about the person. It's a very long one as well. It's almost the whole column, but I didn't learn much about him as a person, the personality, the interests, that sort of thing. And this guy, I classify this one as heavy on number, what is it, number 3? Yeah, brag and boast. And that's mainly his life. Somebody did that, and it's listing everything he did in the Masons. He had every order. It's just like order after order, and I think I'm out of order already. And so I really recommend balance because it's a lot more interesting.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to tell you about cost of various newspapers about their obituary services. The Methow Valley News, if you care to, I don't care where you live, you can put your obituary in the Methow Valley News, and it's the best deal around. It may not be the New York Times. However, you get for $50, you get to have 350, up to 350 words with a photograph. I mean, that is really a good deal. It's 10 cents a word after that. If you happen to go over 350 words, putting your whole life into 350 words is a trick, but it can be done, as with, I've seen something here. But the Seattle Times, for instance, the Seattle Times might be of interest to some people around here. It's $250 an inch, which is about 50 words. So I was trying to do the math in the middle of the night and I couldn't even come up with how much more expensive it is.
That's, Kurt's is an inch copy
Okay, so that costs $250
plus.
and the photo is $198 over that. And if you happen to go over 50 words, which some of these did,
Oh,
big time, it's $11 a line. I mean, that's untenable, but I still think you should all sit down and write your own obituary and blurt and edit and have fun with it, because it's, anyway, Wenatchee World. Mitch comes from Wenatchee. Maybe she'll have an obituary in the Wenatchee World. I couldn't tell how much it costs because
confusing.
it's very complicated and but it's approximately $80 to $90 a column inch. Most of these newspapers, I don't know about the Metro Valley News, does put the obituary in online for a month afterwards, and so do funeral parlors and things. They'll tell you about their online services. I just went online the other day and typed in obituary, online obituaries, and there was a site called ourbeloved.com. In other words, you're writing an obituary for someone else. It only costs $79 for the year with a picture and music and, you know, all the hoopla that goes along with it. So you might consider that also to anyway, this is just to encourage you to write anyway and put your obituary in a place where people are going to find it, etc.
Yeah. And just to go along more with that, when I started with my mom's, this is about 350 words, this like 3/4 of a page typed, and that would be like kind of like the Metro Valley News. And from that, I figured out that I would send mom's obituary out to 4 different papers. And so from that, I worked down, let's see, no. Okay, first off, I took the biggest amount of information and I condensed it for the program for a memorial service. So that was already done, which gives a lot of information. Then I started reducing it. Then the next biggest, well, the biggest actually was, where'd it go? Wenatchee Daily World. Okay, so because my mom was almost 98, I decided that more or less 20 years, every 20 years, where was she? I'll send an obituary to that place. So mom spent her kids, having kids, and the biggest part of being a wife, etc., for her was Wenatchee. And everybody seemed to know her. She was well known. So that's where the biggest article went. And I had her high school graduation picture and then the one like 2 years maybe before she died. And so I personalized it based on experiences in Wenatchee, not other places, like her volunteering or her PTA or whatever. It was Wenatchee. And then from there, the Woodinville Weekly, and that's because, okay, mom lived in Kirkland for about 20 years, but I chose the Woodinville paper because Kirkland was expensive and the Woodinville was free and it was next door. And so I wrote the same thing I would have written for the Kirkland one and I tweaked it again for Woodinville because my mom, every farmer's market, she was there with her booth selling her dried flower arrangements. So that personalized it and made it appropriate for Woodinville. And then the smallest, well, not the small, second to third one, she grew up, born and raised in Aberdeen. And so I sent one to Aberdeen because she went to Weatherwax High School. And then I made it personal by saying that she collected seashells with her grandmother, and I named the name of the grandmother on Pacific Beach. I mainly did it for me. I was hoping I'd find some relatives. I'm dying to have relatives before I die, but I'm not getting anywhere yet. Anyway, and the smallest one was the Seattle Times. And that one, it's about 2.5 inches with a photo. And that's kind of pretty basic, but personal. I made it personal. I followed my rules without even knowing that I even had any system. And what I really would emphasize is consider your audience when you're writing your obituary, if you have multiple places to send it, because it really helps make it more personal. And like, okay, for instance, you just want it to be an announcement. That might be the Seattle Times. If you're wanting to save money, that would be the least amount of information. If you want it to be like a well-rounded condensed version, that might be the Met-Health newspaper. And maybe you want a life story. I would say save your money and write an online obituary, or have somebody read it at a memorial or a wake or whatever. But anyway, just to make it specific for different places. And after all of this, yesterday, I wrote my Seattle Times new obituary,
Oh, good.
1 inch. Made in Washington, Wenatchee. UW grad, 72, Near East Studies. Love God, justice, mercy, humility, nature, animals, music, different cultures. Hated kidding, cultural genocide, unfairness. Leaves behind family and friends who will miss Our Lady of Perpetual Motion. Her dancing, belly laughs, wild but true stories.
Great.
You were right on time.
All right. Okay, so summing up your life in a few paragraphs is not easy. However, don't think of it in paragraphs. Sit down, pick a particular day, pick a particular hour. That's the only way I can do it, is like Thursday between 3 and 4. I'm going to sit down and just write for an hour and just begin. It's not easy to begin. So sit down and start, and then it can be really fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
And enlightening about yourself. You know, you'll learn stuff about yourself.
Mhm.
So I'd like to say, please just get out your shovels and start excavating.
Yeah, and then you might want to have happy hour after that. You might want to just be real generous and have the whole bottle.
It's a great thing. So
Oh, wonderful.
I do have to say one more thing, Deirdre. I wrote my sister Wendy's obituary for almost 5 years ago, and here she is with us today. She's under the Wendy Watts Pearson. That's my sister in
Yay,
Massachusetts, and she was immediately plunked on hospice. And I interviewed her. She didn't want to write it herself. I don't know why, because she's a writer. But she had me write it. So it was just like once removed, but we talked a lot. I wrote it. She accepted it, sort of. And then 4 years later, she was kicked off hospice. Her cancer gone.
Wow.
It's a miracle. And she said, we got to rewrite this obituary. Now, the past doesn't change. However, your whole thinking about yourself,
Yeah.
your whole thinking changes as time moves on. And that's why I say this is a work in progress. It's a process. So, yeah.
Can
Good
we
luck.
hire you to write, like we give you the details and then you'll write it for us?
If not you, then you'll hire me. I need a job badly.
Give it to Mitch.
I'll do any of the dying to have your business.
Wait,
Well, what I noticed is that you both are really good. You're both witty and you both put humor in it, you know, and not everybody is able to do that. So that's really, really fun.
Wendy had her hand up. Wendy, what, did you want to say something?
Oh, well, I hope Midge will send her list. That was great.
Okay, yeah, Deirdre will
And,
send the
I
list.
love the idea of making a list. I mean, that's just, then you can really pick and choose and shorten it
Yeah.
down a little bit. But that was great. I mean, my other one, I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know I got Diana to do it. But Diana was the writer and I wasn't the writer, but I'm a writer too. So there, but it was very good to listen to you two today. And I got much more out of it than I did before. Now I'm gonna have to start this. It'll be fun. This is a list. You can, you don't have to write about everything.
Yeah, good.
Any
So that's
questions?
fun. Yep, that's me.
Great.
Thank you, Midge.
You're welcome. Any questions? We'll be glad to.
I have a question.
Yes, Ellen.
Midge, I didn't get all your categories and the percentages. Will that be on the list or can you repeat
No,
them?
it won't. I just played around with that myself. So what I did was I took the number one, basic foundational, I gave that 20%. And then number 2 and number 3 would be life history and brag and boast. Because you can mix those together
Mhm.
with, or you went to school and then you could say, well, I got this kind of degree and I was in this honor society or whatever. So I gave that 30%. And then for human interests, sentimental, fun, weird, all that, along with philosophical, spiritual, meaningful, I gave that 50% because I think that really defines the individual. If the papers all burn from your, we run away from a fire and everything burns up. And we don't know, oh, I don't know what I did. And I don't know what honor society I was in. Well, but you're a human being. You're a person and you have passions and you have interests. That's unique. That's your DNA,
Mhm.
not the fact that you're Swedish and Irish.
I saw once I was at a doctor's office and there was a magazine there and I was reading this article and they were saying it's good to have a box in your house and all your family knows where that box, it's like a death box. And so it has the pictures that you chose and it would have your obituary, it would have, just special things that you want your family to know about when you're gone. So I thought that was a really good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
Yep.
And especially when you're living in fire country or you're living as a refugee in Ukraine, or you might also want to have like a small, folder kind of thing also in the box so that you don't have to grab the whole box. So you can stick it in your backpack and run.
Yeah.
Which I read.
Any other questions or comments for these wonderful ladies? Danny. You're muted.
Denny, unmute yourself. Denny, unmute yourself.
He's trying.
There you
Then
go.
it makes more noise though. But anyway, for your own family and things, like my father who came from Ireland and had a lot of history back there, you can go on, in an interview and record it very easily for your family, which is a wonderful thing to hear after many years. You hear the voice and everything that went with it. And you can also write as long an obituary about your life as you wish for your family. And that's quite different than how many columns and how much money it costs in the newspaper.
Right.
Yeah.
So, those things were of great value to us, but the part in the paper much more, in a way, formal, even though you put in some humor and things. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, that it's very easy today, to record your comments and things for your family and immediate friends. So just thought I'd put that in.
That's a good idea, Danny. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a really
Recording.
good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And voices,
Yeah.
carrying the voices on is very good. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
singing your song, if you wrote a song,
Yes.
sing it on the tape. One thing I would throw in, because I'm always counting the pennies, I need to. And so I read these obituaries and I think, is that really necessary? Preceded in death by your mom and dad, and they would be about 120 years old. It's kind of like, huh? Things like that, or naming every grandchild and great, their spouses and their towns and all that. Man, you can save a bundle by eliminating that. You can just add 5 grandchildren and 20 great grandchildren, but again, you have to take your audience and, they might be totally offended that they weren't mentioned, but I read these and I think, is that really necessary? Ka-ching, ka-ching.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind, Denny was talking about, and also thinking about with all the technology for video, that's another way of passing on to family. But keep in mind the format that you do this in, because the technology changes all the time. I have a shoebox full of cassette tapes that I keep coveting, and a pile of old worn out cassette players that I might be able to actually play them in, of letters that I did with my parents when I first moved here, and actually when I was still in college. So I have that voice thing, but that technology starts to die. And so then you either have to digitize it, and then what form is that digitation going to be when your family might want to use it? All that technology might be hard to get hold of. So just think about that as far as recording voices or stories, either just audio and or video. Is it going to be accessible in 20 years or 5 years or whatever?
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
point.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah.
Great
It's
point.
true.
That's why the written word is still good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As long as we can still read.
that's right. Yeah.
Nobody will be able to read cursive writing though in 20 years. So
No,
Yeah.
they don't teach it. Yeah.
gotta type it.
Yeah, I highly recommend you type it.
Yeah.
I love the delete button. It's one of my favorite buttons out there. Delete, delete, delete.
Instead of white out,
Oh, white out.
Yeah.
only our generation would know what that is.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And go to it.
Yeah, enjoy. It's fun.
Thank you so very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
thanks a
much,
lot.
lady.
Hey.